The first thing we're going to take a look at inside of Autodesk Inventor 2017 is our enhancements to the interface that we have inside the software. If you look at the top of the screen, you can see our ribbon has been slightly modified from 2016. We no longer have the large application menu button in the upper left. Instead, it's been replaced with a file button. Now, this is more reminiscent of the Microsoft Office suite of products for 2016. So it basically gives you that kind of synonymous feel across multiple applications you might have open on your computer at any given time during the day. Now, this style of interface is a little bit more muted than it was in 2016. What you have here is less definition between our panels like launch and my home. It's a very thin line there. And we don't have the line above the launch or my home. So it's just a little bit more simplified look to our interface. Now, the file button that's there does act like our application menu still. So when you click on it, you still get your options for new and open, our manage here, recent files, our application options, and also exiting the software. So nothing inside the menu itself has changed, just the button that activates it. As far as the My Home screen goes, which was added in 2016 here, we can see that nothing here was really modified from the previous version. We can still modify our panels up and down for sizing. We can still get our advanced templates by choosing the little arrow right here to see all of our available template files. The only thing that's been an option here that is now new is that we can control how many recent documents we have open. And we actually do that through our application options for the software. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. If I go to my Tools tab, I can click on my application options, or you can also get this from your File button here and choose Options. Now, whenever I start a brand new version of the software, I always like to come in here and take a look at what's changed inside of Inventor. So, what settings have been added, what settings have been adjusted that make Inventor behave the way I want it to. Now, some settings I start off right off the bat changing. If you have an old customization file from 2016, you could import that to get yourself started. And if you haven't done that, you maybe want to take a moment, fire up 2016 or 15, whatever version of Inventor you have, choose export and whatever your application options are, and then come here into 2016 and import those if you want your changes to be similar to what your old version of the software was. Now, I'm not going to import anything here right now. I'm just going to go ahead and adjust the things I normally adjust. So I normally turn off my tooltips. I don't really need to see those. Those are great for new users that maybe you need to know what the command does. If you hover on something, it will show you what it does. I'm going to turn on my physical properties on save for parts and assemblies. I'm also going to up my undo file size so I can perform more undos, and also my annotation scale. So my dimensions on screen in the modeling environment look a little bit larger. Now, the new area here in the General tab is basically down here on this My Home area. In the past, you could turn off the My Home with a box that was up here just underneath Startup Action. Now it's been segregated by itself, so you can turn off this My Home screen when you launch the software if you don't like it. And here we can control how many recent documents we have open. So I'm just going to choose 15 there. I think that's a reasonable amount. Now, as you go through the rest of the tabs, I'm going to make some recommendations on good settings, but also point out what's been new. So in the Save tab, nothing here is new, and I basically leave these at default, except if I want to have an import of a file. If you don't want the translation report, you can turn that off. Generally, I don't need the translation report, so I'm going to say do not create. On the File tab here, nothing here has changed either. On our Colors tab, nothing here as far as the color schemes or the background has been modified, but we do have a new setting for our application frame. Right now it is set to dark. So at the top of my screen, on top of the window, you can see it's a dark gray background. I can change this to a light, choose apply. You can see it'll lighten that up. That's a personal preference. I'm going to keep mine the default dark. On the display tab, I always come in here and adjust my appearance application settings. So I'm going to choose that so that every time I open a file, I get the same settings. I always like to view my model by default, shaded with edges and ambient shadows. Now, ambient shadows is not something you want to turn on if you have a really large data set. If you have 20,000 parts, that takes up unnecessary cycles on your GPU. So don't turn that on unless you're working with small designs. I'll choose OK here. Now, for the rest of the display area, a couple of recommended settings if you're using large assemblies to up your frame rate to 20 here. If you restart Inventor, that will take effect. The automatic refinement, this is actually added in 2016, and this is again for large assemblies. If it's disabled and you have a large assembly, if you zoom in, a circle will appear as a polygon instead. So that's great for reducing strain on your graphics card, but not necessary. On the hardware tab, nothing here has changed. You should be running at performance level or quality. If you're running at conservative, you should probably look at upgrading your computer. On the prompts tab, nothing has changed. On the drawing tab, again, nothing here has changed either. I usually leave these settings as default. On content center, nothing has changed here, but you can adjust if you have a vault server to have your content center loaded there. On the assembly tab, nothing here has changed either. So we just basically have our standard settings. I usually leave these alone as well. At the very bottom, you might adjust your express mode if you have a lot of large assemblies. On the iFeature tab, nothing here has changed. I leave those at their default setting. On the part tab, nothing here is really new either, but we can turn off this 3D grips to save ourselves a little bit of frustration, a little bit of GPU on our models. On our sketch tab, a couple new settings here. The first one to point out is the enable link option by default during image insertion. This means if I try to bring in a bitmap, a JPEG, or a PNG file, any image, by default, it used to create a link to the original file. So that if I moved my file around my folder system, it might lose that link and I'll get an error message when I try to open the file the next time. It was always a frustration for me that I had to uncheck that box every single time I brought an image in. Now it's an application option to have that box toggled on or off. So it's off by default. And unless you're in the minority, you're not going to be turning this one on. At the bottom, we also have another new setting called Sketch Display. This controls the opacity or transparency of a sketch when you're viewing it through a shaded model. So if you have your sketch turned on, you have the ability to control how much of that sketch you see through your shaded design. So that's our look at our application options. And again, once you have all of this set the way you want, it's not a bad idea to go over here and choose export and save that out for the next time you load up Inventor, or in case you had to do a reinstall. I'm going to choose OK to have those stick. Now, there's a couple other things to take a look at before we really get into any interface of the actual software dealing with our models. So we want to take a look up here in the Getting Started tab. There is a new tutorial built in, which basically has a more guided approach to it. So yes, we have our basic standard tutorials. We kind of have had these for a long time, and they're very simple, but in case you need a refresher on something, you can run through these, and it gives you actually a video on how to do it. You can actually load in more tutorials from the Autodesk website as well, but they're not as in-depth as what you would get from O'Reilly Media. So I might recommend going through the previous courses we have here to get more in-depth information rather than using these tutorials. But this is new in 2017. If you need to close this, simply choose the little X on your File tabs down here at the bottom. Now, when you have this My Home screen active and you're jumping back and forth between different tabs or you have different files open and you close them, occasionally you'll get this No Browser to show up here on the left-hand side. Now, if we close that, it's not going to stop your model browser from opening when you open up an IPT or an IAM. It's just a little bit of a nuisance inside of this My Home screen. It's another reason why I generally don't use My Home, but again, that's your preference. Just be aware of that quirk. And the last thing I want to talk about in this video is basically our new application manager. This was replaced 2017, and this will appear in your lower right-hand area of your screen in your taskbar. This is basically a way to control your updates. You can see right now for Inventor Professional, I have no pending updates available. As soon as a service pack or a hotfix comes out, it's going to appear in my system tray, and then I can load it as long as you have administrative privileges on your machine. So what I can see here without a service pack is access to the Autodesk Knowledge Network, the Autodesk blogs, the forums, if you have questions about the software or you need some outside assistance, and also the Idea Station, where you can actually put new ideas out there for the community to vote on and see if it gets added to the Autodesk Inventor software. I've actually had a couple ideas up there that have been accepted by Autodesk.